you're going to do troubleshooting or any installations, I mean, you've got to have some good tools, don't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of basic tools that you pretty much always need when you're doing electronic troubleshooting in your car. First one I always suggest is
a brain.
A brain,
yeah,
right?
You got to have that.
You got to have a multimeter as well. Now that's pretty much going to be your workhorse of troubleshooting. And if you call in any tech support line, whether it's KICKER, Rockford Fosgate, a lot of times the first question they're going to ask you is, do you have a multimeter? What are some other tools you might use, John?
Well, you've got the distortion meter, the SMD1, that's going to detect distortion, but something else that's really important, especially if you're looking for good sound, and very few people actually use these, and that's the polarity checker. Tell them how that works.
Yeah, so this is an interesting little tool, and basically you get like a CD, or you can download a track to a USB, and it plays these little pop tracks through your speakers, and you can test each one of your speakers individually. If you start recording, press the test button and hold it up to your speaker, you'll get a red light if your speaker's out of phase, and you'll get a green light if your speaker's in phase. It's a pretty cool tool. Number one problem, or one of the biggest problems that I used to get when I worked in tech support is, hey, I just installed some new speakers in my car, and I don't have any bass response. What gives? And first thing I would ask them is, are you certain that everything is in phase? And oftentimes they weren't sure, so what we'd have to go do is run through and check the wires going to the speaker and make sure they didn't reverse it from the factory, or they didn't reverse their wires at the amplifier.
What kind of questions you got?
Well,
Jacob, you got a lot of them over here.
Oh yeah, I got a whole list. We're going to go through a whole ton of stuff tonight. So.
I made a bunch of notes, and I gave him my notes, so I don't remember what I wrote, so he's probably going to prompt me in a lot of the notes. But
So the first one, so let's say we've got like a fresh installed, brand new audio system. You just put all the equipment in the car and you go to test it, and now you have no sound whatsoever coming from the system. Well, what are some things we can start checking?
Well, like I said, first thing you want to check is, do you have power? And that's going to be the main thing. Now, not only power to the head unit, power to any electronic equipment in the car. If you have processors, amplifiers, obviously, equalizers, whatever you have, make sure everything has got power. The next thing you're going to want to check and make sure is your source is working. Are you using Bluetooth? Are you using USB? Make sure the source is playing and working, and if it's Bluetooth, obviously connected to your head unit. Mm-hmm. And then other little things like, is the muting on? Is the volume up on your phone? Some of the phones, with Bluetooth, you have to turn the volume up, on the phone rather than the unit. So that's one of the big things to check right away. And other bizarre things that can happen is, are your RCAs plugged in? I've seen instances where, did a whole install and you got to listen to it, nothing works, and found out that, hey, when I was, wire tying those RCAs under the dash, I unplugged them from the head unit. And, just goofy things like that. So little common sense goes a long way. And then obviously check to make sure your speakers are connected, because it happens. Sometimes you get everything put in, and it's like you set your sub box down and you rip one of the wires out of the terminal cup because the wire's too short. There's just, like I say, common sense will go a long way in determining what's wrong. And it's a process of elimination.
Yeah.
So what else do I got? If we don't, have any sound when we first put that head unit in?
Well, if you don't have any sound, like you said, the first thing you want to check is make sure your head unit's powered on and working. But, the kind of a flow that we always recommended in tech support was to kind of start at the front of your system and work your way back from there. So if your head unit's working, it's displaying all the proper information on the screen, like the right track and that your CD's playing or whatever you're using, phone, USB, then the first thing to check would be your RCAs. So you're going to get your meter, set it to measure AC voltage, and make sure your RCAs are plugged in first thing. Because sometimes, I've had situations personally where I've sworn I've plugged them in, and turns out like my left RCA is unplugged behind the radio for whatever reason. So make sure they're plugged in, then find the other end of your RCAs, and you're going to want to set it to measure AC voltage. You're going to put the negative probe on your shield, positive probe on the pin in the middle. Honestly, you could flip them if you wanted to, since we're measuring AC voltage. And you're going to play a test tone and turn the volume of your radio up and down. And you should see that voltage fluctuate on your multimeter on both of your RCAs. And that's going to tell you that the signal is getting through your RCAs properly. So let's say you've got a signal from your radio.
What voltage do you think you should see measuring the signal out of the RCA?
Yeah, so that's going to depend on your head unit. So probably like maximum 4 volts or 5 volts, depending on the head unit. I would say most of them are like 2.5 volts. But so we've got a signal. We know our radio's working. We've got a signal from our RCAs, but we still don't have any sound. So, John, what's something else we need to check after that?
Well, if you've got speaker level input to your amplifier, obviously you're going to need to measure that too, and then you should get much more voltage. If you got a 15 volt signal, you're probably looking at like 50 watts or so. Remember, 25 watts is equivalent to a 10 volt signal. 400 watts is equivalent to a 40 volt signal. So if you're testing your speaker outputs, if you're using those for signals, it's going to be a much higher voltage, so you need to make sure that it's all dialed in and proper.
So let's say, we've got our RCAs going to our amplifier, everything looks good on the front end, and now we need to start checking things on our amplifier. So first thing I would look at is make sure the amplifier is turning on, make sure that you've got power to your amplifier. And there's actually quite a few things that could go wrong in the power delivery to your amplifier. First thing you can always check for is a bad connection at the battery, maybe a bad ground or some kind of corrosion or something. But then the next thing you want to look for is to check your fuse. Make sure your fuse isn't blown, make sure it's actually hooked up and connected. And then last thing, once all that looks okay, I'd get a meter and measure for voltage at your amplifier.
Yep. Something else you can do, if you don't have a meter and you want to check the output of the amplifier, just grab any speaker. It doesn't have to be a huge, powerful speaker, but just take any speaker and you can literally go up to the output of the amplifier and just touch it to the speaker outputs, just even set the speaker right on the amp. That at least tells you that, hey, the amplifier is working and we definitely have signal. And, it's just a process of elimination.
Yep, exactly. And all you're trying to do is eliminate all of your pieces of equipment from the equation.